Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Writer podcast, where we talk about writing, publishing, and most of all, the mindset you need to flourish as author in the 21st century. My name is Hannah Steenbach. I'm a German author and coach, and with me is
Diane Patterson. I'm a novelist and blogger.
and
And our special guest today is
Robert Gregory Browne. I'm over here.
and in his cave. I love this.
Exactly.
I love how dark it is.
It's a music studio too, so it's got that vibe going on.
Oh, sweet.
See, all this stuff back here is sound
yeah.
pattern.
Sound baffling. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. And of course I can see the guitar peeking up.
Yes.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. Well, so Robert, do you want to do the intro here, Hannah, or?
God, I don't think I can do that. Do you want to say a few words about you?
We can give the intro to who you are, or you can give a small intro about who you are and your background and.
Oh, God. Okay.
There's so much to tell.
Robert is a guy who has a really cool office. That's why we're talking to him today.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, I've been a writer for almost 30 years, a pro writer for almost 30 years. I started out as a screenwriter and got too old to do that because of rampant ageism in the industry, and went back to my old love, writing novels, and I've been doing that for about 10 years now. I've published with St. Martin's Press and Penguin and Harlequin under a pen name. And in about 2012, I said goodbye to traditional publishing and decided to go indie. Did pretty well with that, and have now started my own small independent publishing company called Browne Media.
Oh,
and that's
cool.
me.
Fascinating.
Very recently, I think within the past couple of weeks, you've come out with a new book, a nonfiction book geared towards writers called Casting the Bones.
Casting the Bones, yes.
Yeah.
That book was actually, over the years, I've written a lot of essays and had a few of them in writing books and online publications, and I decided to basically collect them all, update them, and put them in my little book and get it out there for other writers, try to help them out. And I even included, I did what I don't think a lot of writing books do. I actually included one of my own novellas in there so that people would be able to read it and say, okay, yeah, I want to listen to what this guy says, or this guy's full of crap, whatever they decide. But I thought I'd put that in there just to give them a little bonus.
I think that is awesome because there are so many writers who it's like, here's how you should write, and then I actually pick up one of their books and go, no. No, I don't think so.
Well, one of the points I try to make in the book at the very beginning is I say this is how I write.
Yeah.
This is how I write. This is not necessarily how you have to write, but these are some ideas, and then if they work for you, that's great. If they don't, then discard them. That every writer has to find their own way. For example, I talk about outlining. I very rarely outline unless, when I was traditional publishing, unless the publisher actually demanded an outline. In fact, for Penguin, for the Paradise Prophecy, I did a 200-page outline for that thing. I got a little carried away.
At what point does it become the actual book?
I
guess that's kind of a joke, but I'm kind of serious there.
I know exactly what you're saying. I normally don't do that. I normally just sit down and write, but this was a different situation. They had come to me with kind of an idea they wanted to do. They wanted to have a thriller with spies and angels and demons set in the present day world. And it wasn't really normally the kind of thing I would do. I was doing some supernatural stuff, but I was also doing mystery type stuff. And but they, offered me a lot of money, so I said sure. And but they did want to have some kind of outline ahead of time. I don't think they were expecting a 200-page outline, but once I get going, I just get going. And it just poured out of me. The sad thing is that probably 3/4 of that outline was never used in the actual book. But, you know, it was fun,
That's
I guess.
hilarious.
Yeah, I particularly loved your chapter about the outline. And you quote another author's outline in the chapter, and I
Right.
thought that was quite fascinating to see how detailed that outline was. And I couldn't write the story after creating an outline that detailed.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I feel. It's like I feel like once I've done that, I've expended the energy. It's like, what's the point? Although
Yeah.
I will say that I was writing suspense, romantic suspense for Harlequin Intrigue. I did several novels under a pen name for them, and because I always waited until the last minute to write them, and only usually had about 3 weeks to do it, I would outline it first because I wanted to know exactly where I was going. And it was very helpful. I'm just an extremely lazy writer. I don't like to outline. I just want to sit down and create. I get too anxious to jump into the writing. So
I find that if I don't outline, or I'm actually still working on my own process, if I don't have certain things worked out ahead of time, I'm just going to meander in the weeds for a while.
Well,
I end up dumping a lot of stuff if I'm not more clear about where I am.
oddly enough, even when I don't outline, I very rarely dump anything. If I dump something, it kills me. But I'm a very deliberate writer, and I revise as I go. I don't leave the chapter until I feel like it's ready to be published. And for some reason, I don't know what the reason is, my mind is able to just kind of plot on the fly, and it all works out somehow. I don't know why, but it does.
Well,
I love that. I call it the writing instinct. I think it's deeply ingrained in storytellers. Not I think even everyone is a storyteller, but not all of us are good at it.
Mm,
But we do have an innate sense of how stories work. I firmly believe that.
right, all right. And I think a lot of it has to do too with my screenwriting background because you learn a certain structure on how to tell a story with screenwriting, and I think that really has helped me as a novelist. Um,
yeah, I agree. I mean, structure is everything in screenplays. You can
yep.
toss everything in a screenplay out, but if the structure still works, you have something.
Yeah, when I wound up my screenwriting career started on a high and then just kind of went ooh as the years went by, and I wound up writing Saturday morning cartoons, which is considered the screenwriting ghetto. And one of the guys that I worked with, we were working on a show called Spider-Man Unlimited, and he said to the producers, there were about, I don't know, I think there were 3 or 4 different producers involved, all of whom, of course, had a say in the script. He said, you can change anything you want in the script, but once the structure is set, that's not going to change. It's the way it's going to be because we will not change structure. And he knew exactly what he was talking about because that's a whole different ball of wax. Dialogue, the basic scenes, how they work out. You can change those things, but the structure has to be there and it has to be solid. That's another thing I actually talk about in Casting the Bones is how you really have to lay that foundation in order for your story to be a strong story.
Did it help you to use your screenplay structure when you transferred into writing novels? Are you using a very similar structure?
Oh, absolutely. I actually use basically the same structure, although it's not a conscious, effort to do it. It's so ingrained in my brain that I just happen to do it. If you look at one of my books, you can actually see the screenplay structure. You can look at the page counts and go, oh yeah, he's doing a turning point here. He's got his middle thing happening here. That kind of stuff. But it's not something I consciously think about anymore. It's just instinctive. In fact, almost everything I do is instinct. It's not to write all these articles I wrote over the years. I I basically had to go back and figure out how I did what I do, and it was very instructive to me at the same time.
So there are a lot of writing books out there. A friend of mine actually wanted to start making a catalog of books on writing, and I said, okay, give me a minute, and I can put up a list of 100 titles for you to start with. And he's like, ah. But yeah.
100.
So what?
Just 100 titles. I can't even imagine reading 100 titles on writing.
I don't know if I've read them all, but some have to do with structure, and some have to do with the indie business, and some have to do with different areas of the writing. But quite a few of them are just on writing and different techniques.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your perspective? What's your line on it?
Line in what way? What do you mean? I'm not...
Well, like what makes your perspective different, or why would I want to go pick up Casting the Bones?
Well, you mind if I swear on this podcast?
No, I'll just have to go back and bleep it out.
Okay. I'll say it the nice way. I basically take a no BS approach. I find a lot of these books, and I've read a lot of them over the years, and I find that a lot of them are full of just a lot of filler. And my idea was to just cut to the chase already. Just get to the point. These are the specific things you need in order to write a better book. Now, as I said, you don't necessarily have to do it the way I do it, but these are the things you should be concentrating on. And it's really, writers can go on and on and on and on about their process, and it can frankly get pretty boring, and I just wanted to get to the point. And it's simply my approach. I can't pitch it any other way. It's just my approach. It's a no BS approach to it.
If you talk to Rob online for any length of time, you will discover quite quickly.
Uh-oh.
No, I've just noticed that in various things that you post. Rob has a perspective on things. Don't always agree with it, but he does have a perspective on it.
I'm very opinionated. That's
yes.
Certainly true. I'm not afraid to express it. Not anymore. I used to be afraid back when I was actually publishing for the traditional publishing houses, because you have to be careful what you say, or you will be chastised. In fact, I was chastised a few times by my agent for some of the things I said. But we won't get in.
I can't imagine what you can say. I mean, I think of someone like Chuck Wendig. Do you ever read Chuck Wendig?
Yes, I do.
I mean, his blog is not only not bleeped, he's very opinionated on things and doesn't seem to hold back. But maybe you have a different...
Well, maybe it doesn't hurt him at all. Maybe nobody chastises him, but I was chastised a couple of times saying, just, lay off the Twitter and that kind of thing, So it's like, okay, all right, I'll be cool, But now that I've gone indie, I just say whatever the hell I want, So.
Well, I have seen advice from a fairly successful indie author who says avoid controversy. Nobody wants to hear your opinions on things. You're just going to make your audience angry if you talk about what you really think about things. So it works both ways. I mean, it.
Yeah.
Works both,
yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I don't talk. I sometimes talk about politics and things like that. I try to avoid it as much as possible. But there's just times when I'm a human being and I see things happening and I have to say something about it. I can't help myself. And if it changes a few people's minds, that's great. Mostly on the internet, you don't change anybody's mind, but you never know what's going to happen. And if it harms me in terms of sales, then so be it. That's the way it goes.
You said you had quite an impressive career in traditional publishing, and then you turned indie. What was the major factor that made you decide to go indie?
Well, first, I think it would be disingenuous for me to say that I had quite a successful career in traditional. Maybe to people on the outside looking in, it looked very successful, but I was basically a mid-list writer.
Mhm.
And not all of my books earned out their advance, although I'm sure they made a decent amount of money for the publisher because they kept, giving me contracts. But what made me switch to indie was I was coming out with the aforementioned book, Paradise Prophecy. It was coming out in hardback. And I went to a conference where I ran into a lot of friends like Lee Goldberg and Brett Battles and Joe Conrath, who were all really getting into the indie author industry at that point and starting to make a ton of money. And when I said, "Well, I've got this hardback coming out," they all looked at me and just went, "Oh, that's too bad." It was like, "Wait a minute, this is like author nirvana. You've got this big hardback coming out. You're supposed to be happy for me." And I started to think about that, and then the book came out probably about 6 months later and got great reviews. But I probably sold, I don't even know how many copies sold, but it didn't sell all that great. And I thought, maybe these guys know what they're talking about. The hardback is dying. Maybe I should sit down and just, write something that I want to write. So I wrote a book called Trial Junkies that I had pitched to my agent, and he may have pitched it to a couple of people, but he never really liked the idea. He didn't think there was much commercial viability there. And I said, well, you know what? I'm just going to write this book. I don't give a damn if anybody buys it. If nobody buys it, then I'll self-publish it because I'm seeing my friends being so successful at self-publishing. I wrote the book, and by the time I finished, I had decided, yes, I am going to self-publish. I'm definitely going to self-publish it. I told my agent. He wasn't too happy with that, but we settled our differences on that, and I went out with it. And I'd say within a month of releasing that book, I was selling 1,000 books a day, and it was like,
Wow.
you've got to be kidding me. I had never seen anything like it in my life. Uh, so I haven't turned back since. It's just like free. I mean, I will say that I don't sell 1,000 books a day now. I don't think any indies. Well, there are some indies that do, but I don't think most indies do. But it was a very heady time, and it made me realize just how much money can be made, just how much freedom you have, just how much control you have as an indie author. And I remember saying to my financial guy, I was saying, I can't believe how much money I'm making. It's just unbelievable. And he goes, why is it unbelievable? This is all the money the publisher used to take. And I was like, oh yeah, duh. Of course it is. So I haven't looked back since. As
Do
I
you
said
do you
earlier.
do everything yourself, or do you hire out or outsource covers, formatting?
Well, basically, I feel like my entire life has been preparation for this moment in my life. Before I started writing full time, I was a video editor and a designer. So I design my own covers. I make the videos that I do for video trailers. I've been pretty tech savvy for years, so I format the books. The only thing that I don't do is I don't other than my own self-editing, I don't edit the books. I have a friend who is actually a New York Times best-selling author who reads the books and edits them for me for free. She does it. We exchange various favors,
Mhm.
and she does it for free. And she's probably the best editor I've ever had, probably because she's a writer and knows her stuff. She's a very good writer, knows her stuff, and most editors that you work with aren't writers, you know, at least in New York. I don't know about freelance editors. Probably a lot of them are, but in New York, most of the
What
editors, at
kind of
least
what
that
kind of
I've worked with.
editing did you get in New York, if any? I mean, I assume you did.
Uh, yeah, I wouldn't say the editors were terrible, but I never really got a lot of notes. Mostly, I would get comments like, "This is the cleanest manuscript I've seen in a long time," because I always like to deliver a very, very clean manuscript. I take the philosophy my mother had when I was a kid to never go out in public wearing underwear with holes in it, in case you get into an accident, and you're in the hospital and they think what is this guy with holes in his underwear?
It's like if you've been in an accident, you have bigger problems on your brain.
Absolutely. It's one of those things. But I've always thought that if I were to drop dead tomorrow and somebody were to go on my computer and find my work in progress, I want them to go, wow, this guy really knows his stuff, So I don't want there to be any holes in it. So I'm very anal in that way.
That was one of the first things that I decided for myself when I started writing. I wanted to create manuscripts that are as good as I can make them, and with any typo really makes me angry. So this is something I always thought it was my job as author to create the cleanest manuscript possible, the correct format.
Really want to see these manuscripts that some people must be turning in.
There must be horrible manuscripts.
I mean, Rob, you have talked to lots of writers. What are they turning in their novel-like manuscripts?
Well, I know some writers that I've talked to, they'll turn in what's very much a first draft and hope that the editor is able to point out where the real problems are. I mean, that is basically what an editor's job is. But I want to solve most of the problems. I'm lazy. I just want to get it done. I want to get a page of notes. I don't want 20 pages of notes, Yeah. If I get a page of notes, I can knock off those changes in a couple of days, and I'm done. The book's done. Go publish it. That's the way I want it to be. But for other authors, part of their process is to send it in as a first draft and continue to get that feedback and go through several drafts until they have the book that they really want. I just, it's all down to my laziness, basically.
Yeah, I don't think no.
I mean, that's what developmental editors are for. I know a person who actually uses a developmental editor, and they sort of look at the first draft and then they tweak the story, and then she goes back and writes it again. And I personally, I don't want to spend the money on that.
Yeah, I would imagine that could add up pretty fast. I have no idea what editors charge, but it can't be cheap.
No, it's not. It's an investment.
But
I think it's a worthwhile investment, but it's an investment.
It is an investment, but I'm also, and this is slightly controversial, I got into an argument with somebody on Facebook about this. I don't think that every author necessarily needs an editor. To me, it's like saying, well, every painter needs an editor, or every songwriter needs an editor. Why do they necessarily need an editor? If they know what they're doing, if they've been doing it for years, and a songwriter knows how to bang out a song, why does he need somebody to come in and go, oh no, well you should change this verse here and do that? He knows how to write a song, and he's probably writing hit songs. I think it's true for a lot of writers that if they can really have the ability to self-edit and be honest with themselves, why do they necessarily need an editor?
Let's look at your premises there, Rob.
Okay.
I think if the author is able to be honest with themselves, I don't think most writers develop bleep detectors, as Hemingway put it. That they're like, well, I wrote this, and that's a funny scene, and it's like, yeah, but it stops the action cold, and it's like, yo, but it's a funny scene, I'm keeping it. Well, okay.
Yeah, see, I don't. I'm of the attitude that you don't stray, you don't go off course, you don't do stuff like that.
Well, I was talking about this in an earlier podcast, but I read a book by someone who's written 20 or 30 books, I'm not sure exactly, and is doing better than I am, so let's just get that out there. And I read one of this person's books, and I finished it, and I said, that either needed another pass or an editor to point out some of the major flaws, because it was very much a first draft, and I am not really interested in picking up something by that author again, and they clearly have a lot of experience.
I
Well,
still think it's a craft. It's a craft development or craft process. If someone writes a lot, gets a lot of feedback from beta readers, friends, whatever, editors, it's every time you do that, it's a chance of learning more. And when I look back to the stuff that I wrote when I got bit by the writing bug, that needs a lot of work. I wouldn't publish it the way it is now. It never got published. And I still love the story, but I would have to rework it because back then I knew nothing. I was just writing my heart out because the story was in my head. But now that I've been reading and writing, and mostly reading with a really open eye to structure, to development, to characters, you know, have this eye for the craft, looking at everything an author does in their books, and you can learn to spot the weak spots by that. You can learn to appreciate the really good scenes that work on several levels, and it's just, I think it's just being passionate about the craft, being willing to learn.
mhm.
Well, how much of
And
a factor?
Well,
How much of a factor do you think that the indie publishing schedule has writers developing their craft?
well, I actually address that in the book. One of the chapters in my book is, "Are you actually ready to be a published author?" And I think too many people are too anxious to just jump in there. And now with the indie revolution, they can jump in and just throw it up on Amazon. And I think that's a huge mistake a lot of times. If you're a beginning writer, I wrote for I started writing when I was 16 and probably didn't have my first. I think my first short story was published probably around 32 or something like that. And I sold my first screenplay at 35. All that time, I actually never showed my work to anybody. I didn't show it to anybody. I would leave it aside and go back and look at it later and go, yeah, this is really awful. I need to improve on that. And I did that for years. I didn't assume that, except for that when I was 16, one of the very first things I wrote was a teleplay for a show called Harry O. It was a mystery show. And because I loved that show, and and after I wrote that teleplay, I just knew that it was going to sell. It was great. And my dad was my quasi agent at the time, and he actually got a hold of the producers.
Back when you
And
could do that.
yes, he got hold of the producers, and he got the script to them. And I got the script back about 2 weeks later with a note from one of the producers saying, nice try, no cigar. The problem with this script is that it's overwritten. And what he meant was that I had put in every detail, including the kitchen sink and the narrative of that script, and the dialogue was, each character had 10 lines of dialogue and the whole bit, and it really wasn't much of an exchange. So I just really had thrown everything into that. But that one comment really made me sit back and go, yeah, maybe I'm not as ready to do this as I think I am. So it helped me a lot, and I certainly didn't overwrite the next script or the next script after that. And I learned not to do it in stories as well. And to go back to what you were saying about what are authors handing into their editors, maybe a lot of it is something that is overwritten. They've just thrown everything in hopes that the editor will come in and go, okay, you need to get rid of this, you need to get rid of this, you need to get rid of this. To me, that's the work that I want to do. So
Yeah, I wonder if that's like the Thomas Wolfe myth. I can't. God, what was the name of that editor? Maxwell. Where Thomas Wolfe would hand in these gigantic manuscripts and the editor really shaped them. Maxwell. No, somebody will.
Can't think of his name.
Yeah, smart. Ha! No, just kidding. Yeah, that a lot of writers are expecting to be saved, and I don't expect to be saved. I expect to write my manuscript and the editor to point out things that I have missed, things that maybe I could pump up. But for the most part, you have to develop your own bleep detector to know. I don't expect to get any surprises back from my editor. Let's put it that way.
I'll take it even a little further. I would just as soon get 0 notes back from my from my editor.
Well, okay.
If I can have a manuscript, turn in a manuscript to an editor, and it comes back with, oh, this is great. I don't want to change anything. I would be a happy person.
I got a really great note from an editor, which is, she said, I don't have it ready to come back because I got so involved in the second half of the book, I forgot to keep making notes. So if you could just hold on.
Well, that's a good note to get.
That had me happy the rest of the day.
I have a friend. In fact, the woman who edits my books, she turned in a manuscript a couple of manuscripts ago, and the editor actually did come back and say, "I don't want to change your work." Wow. And I was like, "Wow, awesome. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody actually have that happen to them."
Well, one of my beta readers sat down with paper and pencil, and then she said in an email, "I sat down with paper and pencil, and then I got so lost in the story that I didn't write down a word." And she had a couple of suggestions, which I took when I did the editing. But my formatting people, I haven't taken the time to learn how to format books, and I do a really beautiful job, and I make beautiful books and print books. And they keep telling me I give them the cleanest manuscripts of everyone they work with.
So I see a lot on writing boards like K-boards, which is the one I usually mention, but there are other ones as well, where a lot of writers think of editing as fixing typos or cleaning up the grammar a little.
They confuse copy editing with developmental editing. It's,
And it's like, well, I have a friend read it over for typos, and it's like, that's good. That's not editing. Well.
But
But I think it again.
Most of them are new and they're young and they don't really fully comprehend what it takes to write a book. They're very enthusiastic. They just want to jump in and do it. And once they've done it, they've succeeded, and they think, "Wow, this is something great. I was there. I've done that." And then fortunately I didn't. Maybe because I didn't have the mechanism to do it, I didn't throw it out to the world, but I basically just stuck it in a drawer because I knew that if I went back to it in a few weeks, I probably wouldn't be feeling the same way. And that's what I always encourage.
What were you writing during those 15 years between 16 and 31?
Screenplays, beginnings of novels. I was never able to complete. I completed one novel, but it was actually only like 90 pages long, so it wasn't really a novel, I was writing all kinds of things. I also had a bit of a detour into music. You see the guitar here, where I wanted to be a rock star for a while. So I didn't get a whole lot of writing during that period.
I asked this of a lot of writers that I talked to. How many complete units would you say you had really finished before things started to move?
Well, with screenwriting, my first complete screenplay sold.
Yeah.
With novels, my first complete novel sold.
That's
up
cool.
Until I know that's I know. I always tell people I sold the first short story I ever sold out. I sent out, and then I never sold another one. Well, I always wonder because when I was at USC in film school, we would keep bringing people in, and they always said that it was like the 9th screenplay.
Yeah, I don't have the patience. Well, my problem is I didn't have the patience to complete anything. Now maybe if I had completed all those and tried to sell them, they wouldn't have gone anywhere. But I would never actually fully. I may have completed one screenplay, although if I look back on it, I probably never felt that it was complete. But I actually wrote half a screenplay, and I was living in Hawaii at the time, and a guy who used to be a big TV writer, he used to write shows like Twilight Zone and those kinds of shows. He moved to Hawaii and just started having classes. And I said, well, I got to take a class from this guy. But in order to be in his class, it was considered an advanced class. You had to turn in something. And I had written half of a screenplay. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just give him that, and hopefully I'll get into his class. Well, within a week of sending it to him, he called me up on the phone and he said, "You don't need me, you need an agent." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "Finish this damn screenplay and I will send it to somebody, and just do it. Get it done. You don't need to take my." I took his class anyway, but he said, "You don't need to take my class." So I did that, and he actually sent it to a few people who didn't buy it, but somewhere within that period of time, another friend of mine said, "Hey, Rob, have you seen that ad in Premiere Magazine?" This was a big magazine back in the 90s for movies and, I guess for screenwriters and things like that. And there was an ad that had sell your screenplay to Hollywood or whatever, and it was for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Nickel Fellowship.
Right.
And my friend said, "Oh, you should enter your screenplay into that." And I was like, I got a, snowball chance to hell of winning this thing. But I decided, what the heck? I got it in just under the deadline. And a few months later, I got a call saying, or no, it was actually a letter saying that out of so many thousand entries, you are one of 200 who are going to be moving forward. And I remember getting that letter in my mailbox, living on Kalanianaole Highway in Hawaii, pulling it out of the mailbox and with shaky hands going, "Oh my God, I'm actually getting a correspondence on this thing," and reading that. And for some reason, I turned to my wife and I said, "I'm going to win this thing." And I don't know why. I just knew that I was going to win it, and I did go on to actually win it. So it was the beginning of my screenwriting career.
That's
and
awesome.
that script ultimately sold to Showtime and was in development hell for about 2 years, and then everybody got fired and it never got made. It sold to another.
Oh.
It sold to
Yeah,
another company.
the
Yeah.
business is so different than I think it's really still presented to people.
Oh, absolutely.
I
Publishing
mean,
business too.
I hear the same things being said, 20 years after I first got interested in screenwriting. Like, really, guys? It's changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I noticed your logo down here for Browne House, and you have been opinionated on the subject of publishers, let's say.
Really? Okay.
And now you're kind of starting your own publishing house. What's up with that, Rob?
Well, if you notice, what I'm mostly opinionated about with publishers are two things. Some of the things they say about indie publishing. But we'll ignore that. But my biggest beef with publishers is that we are the ones, authors, I'm speaking as an author right now, we are the ones who make your business possible. Without us, you got nothing. But we get the smallest little sliver of the pie when it comes to financial output. The basic, I think the average, what's the word, advance today is $3,000, which is ridiculous. Now, you may win the lottery and get offered. I had a friend who hadn't been published. She did a YA novel and she got a $750,000 advance, But that's a rarity. That doesn't happen very often. Most new authors get about $3,000. Back when I was breaking in, most new authors got about $5,000. I was a little more fortunate. My first deal was 2 books for $30,000. But you can't make a living doing that. You have to have a day job. And I'm thinking, why isn't it 50-50? In fact, even 60-40. I mean, what do publishers do? They don't market mid-listers. They may send out the books to reviewers or whatever, but they really don't do a lot of marketing. In fact, the first thing I was told when I got my traditional deal was, okay, you have to get a Facebook page, you have to, actually they told me it was a MySpace page back then. Get a MySpace page, You have to get on Twitter. I think Twitter was happening. You have to have a blog. You know, you have to do all these things, and you've got to get out there and hype yourself. And you know, I was thinking, yeah, I'm happy to do all that stuff, and thinking that they were going to be doing things like ads in magazines and in the New York Times and bus stop stuff and all that. None of that happened. Not a bit of that happened. It was all basically uh, on me, and I think the biggest contribution they did, besides sending it out to reviewers, was to make dates for me to go around to various bookstores and do little speaking engagements and signings, which really I think, although they can be fun to do, they can also be very dreary, but I don't think they sell a lot of books. So really, why are we giving away the lion's share of the money to the publisher simply for that marketing, those covers, the editing, and the distribution? The distribution probably would be the biggest part of it, but does it really deserve, you know, that kind of a cut? Because without us, they wouldn't have anything to distribute. That's the beef that I have with traditional publishers. And since the indie revolution came about, they're paying even less and having even more egregious terms in their contracts. Apparently now, I mean, I haven't seen a recent contract, but apparently now publishers want that book for the life of the copyright, which is the author's age, you know, after author's death, it's 70 years. So you get a $3,000 advance to give them the book for potentially maybe 100 years, you know, or whatever, or longer. By the time your grandkids get it, it's in the public domain and it has absolutely no value to them whatsoever. So what does $3,000, say you don't earn out, what does $3,000 break down to over 100 years? You know, practically nothing. And you're spending sometimes a year or longer to write this book, and you're really not getting what's due to you, and which is why I get so angry on Facebook sometimes when I read some of these articles that say, oh, you need to traditionally publish, otherwise you're not legitimate. Well, that's BS. And in fact, there's an article I saw today that, and I didn't have a chance to read it, but the headline was, "Is traditional publishing ruining literature?" I thought that was an interesting, you know, you usually see it the other way around. Is indie publishing ruining literature? But this one actually said, "Is traditional publishing ruining literature?" I'm kind of anxious to read. I posted it on Facebook. I haven't read it yet, but I'm anxious.
Nice.
No, I just saw I posted it on there and just said discuss, so that I would be able to go back and read it and then discuss it, because I'm very interested to see what the guy has to say.
I think there's a discussion about it on the Passive Voice already. I looked into that this morning.
Oh.
My morning, which is kind of like 9 hours ahead of yours.
Yeah.
But
I have another question.
Wait a second. You didn't answer my question. Now you're
What was the question?
sort of a publishing house yourself.
Well,
what does this entail in the indie publishing world?
Okay, my publishing house is a little bit different in that the projects that I'm working on are projects that I have generated myself. I've come up with the idea. I basically want to treat it kind of like a television show. And then I've gone out to writer friends to say, are you interested in writing for this show? And the first one we came out with is a thing called Linger, which is what I call a binge reading series. I did it because I had watched House of Cards and how they threw all the episodes out at once. And I said, why is anybody doing this with books? But I knew it would be impossible for me to write 5 books in a relatively short period of time. So I went to some friends and said, would you be interested? I will, compensate you. Would you be interested in writing these books? And so I offer contracts that pay the author 60%, and then I take the 40% for doing the cover, the editing, the formatting, and the marketing of the books, because I think that's a much fairer cut. I think the author should actually get most of the money. So I wrote the first book myself, and then four other authors wrote the next four, so we have five out right now, and then I have a few other authors that are working on further episodes. And that's not just Linger. There's a couple other things I have going too, but we write them under a house name. They're all acknowledged in the book that they wrote the book, but it kind of harkens back to when I grew up reading a lot of books that were written by house name authors like Maxwell Grant, who wrote the Shadow books and things like that. And it was just something I wanted to do. So that's why I'm a publisher.
Okay.
I couldn't help noticing that the name of your publishing house, it looks rather German. Is there any connection to that?
Yeah, that I'm a quarter German. So my father was half German. My grandfather, full German, and I just have those German roots. So, in fact, I think the first foreign deal I got was actually a German deal too. So it all seemed to be kind of.
Well, that's the major market outside the English-speaking world, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, that's.
Probably. I mean, Spanish. Yeah. There are more Spanish speakers, but I think the market is less developed, and there aren't any big, massive publishing houses. Like Bertelsmann certainly is huge.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they own Random House.
They own Random House. Yeah, they do.
I know it's Penguin Random, but it should have been Random Penguin.
It should have been.
Yeah. Yes, it should have. I think so too.
Shoot, I'm sorry, Hannah. You had a question, and then I.
Yeah, that was okay. That was a question about the German name.
Oh.
I'm always curious about translations because you never know. The translator has to have kind of a voice too, I would think, and you never know if their voice matches your voice necessarily. But I went on the Amazon Crossing did a German translation of Trial Junkies. Mm-hmm. And I went on the German Amazon site to just look at the reviews, and they do that Google translation thing so you can kind of read it, and it totally makes no sense. But I was really surprised where one of the reviewers quoted a line that they really loved from the book, and in the Google translation, the line was almost word for word what it was in the book, and I thought, maybe that translator is doing a great job, actually getting across what I wanted to say, which is good. So it made me feel better because I never know, with a translator, what's coming out at the other end.
I'm a certified translator, not a book translator, not a literature translator, but more of a business English translator. That's what I did after finishing school, and I really considered translating books. When I was an exchange student in California, I actually sat down and translated about 2/3 of Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey because I was so excited by the book, so I sat down and translated it by hand.
Wow.
And then I came home and found, of course, it had been translated already into German. There's a large publisher that does fantasy, and they did tons of translations. And I looked at the book, and I read, a friend of mine owned it, and I borrowed it, and I started reading it, and I was so disappointed because the entire voice was lost.
Yeah, that's always my concern. When I was a kid, I grew up in Hawaii, so I was heavy into Japanese culture and Japanese samurai movies and things like that. And I remember finding a couple of translations of samurai novels from Japan, and they were the driest things I ever read in my life. It was just so dry, and it was like, oh my God, I can't read this. This is horrible. Yeah. And it was many years before I realized it was actually the translator who was just a terrible translator. I'm sure the Japanese version is fantastic.
Yeah, and I found out why the German translations are so bad, which was another reason why I started buying English originals as much as I could. Back then it was rather difficult. So 3 hoorays for Amazon because they make it really easy for me to get English language books here. It's just, I just order them. Translators were earning so little money for translating a book that they would have to translate 3 to 4 books per month to make a living. Now imagine just typing a 200-page novel. Just typing it takes a week. How do you translate? So they were just using very, very generic words, translations. They just wrote it all down in the other language.
To me, this is just another example of traditional publishing not valuing authors. They I don't feel in a lot of time, because a translator is in effect an author. If the translator, I would think, might have their own voice, but if possible, will try to at least translate the original author's voice.
I can't remember the exact terms of how it works, but if you get the translation done in Germany, the German translator has moral rights?
No, there's actually been a change. It used to be they would get paid a lump sum, like 500 marks,
right.
250 to 500 euro for a translation of a novel.
Oh my God.
It has changed, and the standard is now a percentage of the sales price. So it's I think it's around 5 to 7% of book price of
forever.
Forgive me, I don't know the word.
Well, that's
the full store price.
That's a nice change. That's good. I'm glad that's happening.
Yeah, a lot of people say we can't afford translators anymore because we don't want to pay the percentage. Yeah. But I think it's actually
a lot of indie authors say that. I've definitely heard that on many writers' boards. Read that, I suppose.
Well, that's now I can talk about a beef with indie authors that I have, is so many of them that are unwilling to invest in their own careers. Some that think that they can just throw things up there, and some of the covers that I see, it's like, invest a few $100 and get a good cover. There are people out there who do wonderful cover work. Invest money in your own career. If you were opening a hamburger stand, are you just going to, pitch a tent and start frying hamburgers? No, you're going to invest in some space. You're going to get all the things you need. You're going to spend a lot of money in order to make that business work. If you want to be an indie author, you're going to have to spend some money. There's just no way around it.
So since you've been doing this for 3 years now, I think, what would you say? I mean, it has changed a lot since 2012, which I guess is when I started getting interested in it. What would you say are still the biggest mistakes indie authors are making that you see? I mean, there's not investing, absolutely.
Not investing.
Boy, am I astonished by that.
And being too anxious to put their work out, frankly. They're not ready. A lot of them are just not ready. This is why you get that blanket assertion that, all indie books are horrible. That's not true. There are a hell of a lot of great indie writers. There are really good indie writers. But there are also a lot of terrible ones, and they won't necessarily always be terrible, but they have to work toward getting good. They have to make that effort and keep writing and keep writing. A lot of people write their first thing and throw it up, and it makes you want to throw up. It's just
I've been astonished, actually, at how many books I'm still picking up that are flat out terrible, and I'm kind of embarrassed.
At the same time, well, I agree, but at the same time, I will say that I've seen quite a few traditional books that are really terrible too.
Okay, so let me ask you about this. I'm sorry, Hannah, I keep cutting you off.
It's okay. I have one more question
about typos in traditional books, and I'm going to say that I've seen, certainly compared to indie books, I've seen very few typos in traditional books.
My wife found about, I think it was somewhere between 10 and 15 typos in my book, The Paradise Prophecy, that was put out by Penguin Dutton.
Was this on paper or on the ebook? Because I'm wondering if these errors come in with OCR.
Well, hopefully they aren't using OCR. I don't think by that time they were using OCR.
Yeah.
That's more of an older thing, but she found this in the paper version. So
wow. Okay.
it was like Really? I mean, I loved working with them. I wouldn't say anything bad about the people that I worked with, but I was kind of shocked that it had so many typos in it. It was a long book. It was like 130,000 words, but still.
Absolutely, the biggest problem I keep coming across in traditional books and in indie books is that there is no shape. The way I've said it in previous podcasts is it's one darn thing after the other. And I've definitely found this in a lot of Amazon published books, which has really shocked me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What do you mean by one thing after?
It's like I was reading, I think it was an urban fantasy, where they find a ghost, and then there's an argument at home, and then there's something about the ghost, and then they go out and investigate a vampire, and then they go home and have an argument. And it's like, where is this going? This is a series of scenes that you have put together. There is no shape here. There is no, I mean, I'm exaggerating for the purposes of emphasis, but...
So in other words, they don't know how to tell a story, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, well...
And this was an Amazon book. I was really, really astonished. Actually.
Well, I don't necessarily find it all that astonishing because I have found, I haven't read any Amazon books like that, but I've read other big publishers' books that are just as terrible as that.
Wow.
And I'm often surprised. Of course, I've had reviews where people have said in the review, how did this guy ever get a publishing deal, so...
Well, yeah, those people.
It's all subjective,
No, so you would say that some indie authors should wait.
I think most indie authors should wait. If you've never
wait, I think they should write more.
Well, yes, that's what I mean by wait. Wait before publishing. Don't throw the first thing that you've done up there. Throw it in a drawer and write the next one. Throw that one in a drawer and write the next one. Then go back to the first one and go, oh yeah, okay, I'm better than this now, and fix it. If it can be fixed, then fix it. Then think about publishing it. Don't be so anxious to jump in there. When I say I sold my first complete screenplay, I had also done a lot of writing, a lot of things, learning the craft, writing. No, had never completed a full screenplay, but maybe I didn't complete one because I wasn't ready to complete one. Maybe I didn't understand how to complete one. And it wasn't until I got to that point that it was, I was able to sell it. The same thing with my first book. I had been writing, after that first screenplay sold, I wrote 20 more. And I learned a lot doing that. And I always had kind of novelistic screenplays, so when it came time to sit down and write a novel, I felt I didn't feel I was ready for it, but I thought I'd give it a try. I only felt I was ready for it when I had written about 3 or 4 chapters at the urging of a friend who was a novelist / screenwriter. And she said, write 3 or 4 chapters and send it to me. And so I did. And the email I got back was, finish this book. And she wanted to read the whole thing. So I did, and that's what sold.
There's one thing I want to ask you and that's the question that I always ask people on our podcast, because our focus is on mindset as well. And you say, well, give yourself time to develop as a writer. That would be an important part of the mindset. Being a successful author, learn the craft, take the time to become good at it. What would be your take of the most important mindset that indie authors need?
You have to develop confidence. I really think that confidence is a huge part of writing. You have to be confident, and it can't be a false confidence. It has to be real confidence. I have the confidence to know that I can sit down and write a book. I can write a book that will be compelling to certain readers. Other readers may hate it, but there is a certain segment of readers that will find the book compelling. I know how to write a scene. I know how to write dialogue. I have the confidence that I can do that. I didn't always have that confidence. And you have to develop that, and that again goes back to you have to keep writing and writing until you develop that confidence. And like I said, it can't be a false confidence. It has to be real. You have to be, you have to have a strong ego, but not be an egotist, if you know what I mean. You have to recognize that your writing is good, but not be deluded into thinking that your writing is good when it isn't. You know, I had an experience many years ago, back before I was a pro writer. I was an aspiring writer, and I met this guy who was also an aspiring writer, and he said to me, "You got to come over to my house because I got to give you this book that I wrote. It's a frickin' masterpiece." And I'm thinking, okay, all right, yeah, okay, I'll come over and read it. I figure if a guy's got that much confidence in what he's writing, you know, it must be something, you know. And so I went over, and instead of giving me the book to take with me, he wanted me to sit right down there in his chair and read it.
Oh, dear God.
And I was like, it was red flag number one, you know. But I was like, you know, I was young, I was stupid. So I said, okay, I'll start reading. I said I can't read the whole thing necessarily, but I'll read it. So I sat down and I started reading, and okay, at the time I was still learning how to be a writer, but I recognized that this was a giant pile, to put it nicely. It was just the characterization. I mean, there was no characterization. The plot was all over the place. It was just horrible. It was horrible to the nth degree. And I'm sitting there and I'm turning the pages and I'm just thinking, what am I going to say to this guy? You know, who's calling this thing a masterpiece? And I'm starting to think I was being punked or something, you know. So finally I put it aside and I thought back to that TV writer who had been honest with me, you know, that your book is overwritten. And I said, you know, look, I'm not a pro writer by any means, but this is what I think, you know, needs to be worked on in this book. And just the fact that I said that anything needed to be worked on made this guy's eyes just start to blaze. And he was looking at me with hate in his eyes. And I said, well, I got to go. And he actually tried to prevent me from walking out the door because he wanted to have a very stern conversation with me about how wrong I was. And for a minute there, I feared for my life. Okay. And I actually spent the next several months wondering if I was as deluded as he was about my own work. I hope he went on to become a great writer. I don't know. I don't even remember his name. But, you know, and he was a very nice guy. He just didn't take the criticism very well, obviously. And I went on for months after that saying, and even to this day, sometimes I'll get into that mood. It's like, am I deluding myself like that guy was deluding himself, you know, about his work? And you really have to just work and work and work, and so that you build that confidence and know that what you're doing is good.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a joke that I heard down in Los Angeles. What's the biggest lie in Hollywood? I have a really great screenplay here. What's the second biggest lie? I'd love to read it.
Yeah.
You know, because there's nothing more terrifying than somebody saying, please read this.
Oh, no kidding.
And you really have to come up with something that someone will go, okay, and take a look and then go, oh, this person knows what they're doing. Yay.
Yeah, I know. I've had a few experiences like that myself. And most of the time when people ask me to read their book, there are some people that I will do it, but most of the time, I frankly, and it's the truth, I don't have time. You know, I've got so many things that I have to do. I don't have time, and I really wish them well. And I may be passing up on some really great books, you know, I probably am, but I just don't have time to read them, you know. So that's usually my go-to excuse. Sorry, I don't have time, because it's true.
Not even an excuse.
Well, speaking of time, it is that time again. Where we have come to the end of another fantastic podcast. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, no, this was fantastic.
It's a pleasure.
Our guest has been Robert Gregory Browne, a novelist and owner of Browne House Books or Browne House Media?
Media.
And his latest book is Casting the Bones, an indie author's guide to writing. And I believe it is in Kindle Unlimited, so if you are a member of that, you can pick it up.
Yeah, give me those page turns.
Yes, and I will have links to all of this in the show notes. So thank you for joining us for another 21st Century Writer podcast. My name is Diane Patterson.
I'm Hannah Steenbach.
And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.